Let's talk about electric vehicles today, but not the fun crawler type, the full size. I recently got a Tesla and I'd like to talk about it. Yeah, so I got a Tesla a month and a half ago, something like that. A Tesla Model Y, 2022, I do think, relatively new. And I've been wanting a Tesla for quite a long time, and this one was a deal that I just really couldn't refuse. It was a really good deal. Some dude lost his shirt on it, and then the dealership also lost their shirt on it, so I couldn't say no. I've wanted one for a while. So there's good and there's bad, and I just want to kind of talk about it. You've probably seen things in the news since it's wintertime here lately about the bad sides of the electric vehicles, but there is good and there is bad. So let's talk about some of the good first. It is a fun car to drive. I've got a Subaru WRX STI. Make all the STI jokes you want in the comments. And then I've got this long-range Model Y, a relatively new one. So it's got good power, fresh batteries, all that kind of stuff. The Model Y is technically faster, at least in a straight line. It doesn't corner as well. You can't drift it. It's not nearly as fun to drive. But as far as going from stoplight to stoplight, town driving, it's faster. Now I can, of course, stay in the turbo just right on the WRX, and if I'm shifting just right, I can, like stay even with it, kinda, not really as fast, 0 to 60. But when you just stomp on a pedal and it goes and there's no shifting, of course, it's easier to be faster. So around town, I would say the Tesla, the Model Y in particular, is great. It's got lots of storage. I've got kids. You can throw tons of stuff in the back. It's very roomy. The whole glass top is pretty awesome. There's a lot of creature comforts to them. All the heated seats, even the back seats are heated, which is pretty rad. Heated steering wheel. I can warm it up with my app if I want to in the morning time, which has been really cold lately, and that's been nice. Just tell it. You can tell it actually. Get ready by 8 a.m. Monday through Friday or whatever, or you can just boop boop on your app and it'll warm up for you. Super duper convenient. As far as driving, it can handle really nice and loose like a luxury car if you want. You can stiffen it up if you want. For around town, honestly, it's extremely good. I don't even have the fast charger. I've got the 120 volt charger, and on average I get about 30 miles of range per night when I plug it in, or 10% of the battery, ish. So for my use around town, it works great. And this is limiting it to a 10 amp, 10 amps off the wall. If I go to 15 amps at the shop here, I could charge 15 miles or so. I'm sorry. 150% would be 45 miles of range a day, and for getting around town is fine. I can always go to the supercharger and I can boost it up, do a 100% charge in about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, or I can install a supercharger at my house, which really isn't that big of a deal, but the house that I'm currently in has a really old panel and I'd need to replace the panel. I'd need to replace a lot of stuff. So the $400 supercharger itself would cost a lot more in the long run because of the installation. Pulling new wires, I'd have to pull about 50 feet of 4-gauge, which in itself isn't that expensive, but if I'm paying somebody to do it, it of course would be, along with a whole new box in my house and another 60 amp circuit on there. So that kind of cost does add up. But just driving around town, if I'm doing 30 miles, I'm maybe paying $3 a day at my house, $1.50 here at the shop because we've got a much lower rate. And so as compared to the WRX, which if I'm lucky gets 18 miles to the gallon around town, I'm paying less money to use. And of course, I hardly ever hit the brakes. It's got regen on there. So what's going to wear out? Tires, bearings? There's nothing to wear out. Windshield wipers, that's the other thing really. But I would say long term it's going to be a pretty inexpensive car to operate. So that is definitely nice. There's some downsides though. So like I told you about the charging, if you don't have a supercharger at your house and you need to commute a lot more, I live like a mile and a half from the shop. So my average commute is very short. You go to the grocery store and it's like 3 miles in the other direction. I don't really have a lot of driving to do. If you're having to get on the highway and go to and from, like if you're commuting into a city, yeah, maybe not so great. Another one of the downsides, you can definitely tell it is a California engineered car. Their door handles aren't meant for the weather. It's just, when it gets cold, they'll freeze up, and yeah, I can use the app and I can pop my door open manually that way, and then I gotta hop in, you press the button and all the kids' doors will open or whatever. But most handles, especially if it's coming out of Detroit, they know how to handle ice and cold weather. The Tesla does not. And that's something definitely to be aware of. Along with that, when it gets cold, the batteries have to stay warm. So on average, this last week, we were in the negatives. It was like negative 15 Fahrenheit, and we were getting up to 0 some days, or up to 5, very, very cold. And it was taking $3 a day of electricity just to keep my batteries static. So on the really, really cold nights, I was plugging in, and it would actually be at a lesser charge rate as it was the night before when I plugged it in. A little frustrating for driving around town, I must say. They're just not meant for the cold weather. Now, if I was Tesla, I would maybe give an option of don't warm the battery so much, because they don't have to be 70 Fahrenheit for just tooling around at low speeds, but for max performance, you want them to be pretty warm. And it was trying to keep them at max performance all the time, at a usable temperature, when in reality, just bringing them up to maybe like freezing would have been enough for my use, and it should just be able to limit your amp draw instead. But maybe that's something they can add in the future. Since it does update over the air, they can always add features like this, especially after seeing so many people stuck in Chicago not being able to charge because it's just so incredibly cold. Maybe the chargers were acting up, the battery's trying to keep itself warm, it's got to warm up before you can charge. You're getting nowhere, essentially. And this is why I didn't get rid of my gas car, is that there is definitely some range limitations when it gets cold. Now, I had planned to drive to Denver and back this past weekend on the electric car. There's superchargers all along the way. Once it got so cold, I wouldn't actually make it in between chargers, because it would say, hey, I've got 300 miles of range. It's not gonna make it. It's just not gonna make it. So I didn't want to stick my neck out there and give it a shot. Supposedly I would have 20% battery left over every time I got to a supercharger, but if we're spending so much energy keeping the battery warm, it's not gonna make it. This is the big downside. Your range goes down, and it can go down up to 50% depending on how far you're driving, how fast you're driving, et cetera, et cetera. Your range can be reduced by 50% in these cars just because they have to keep the batteries warm when it's so cold. So a more of a fair weather car, again, engineered in California. They're not used to that super duper cold weather. They don't have to deal with it. And I don't think it's that they didn't consider it, it's just that they consider this car more of maybe a small town car, or what have you. Now the charging is could be a limitation for you if you commute in long distances every day. I don't. So I believe for a town car, as compared to the WRX, it's a very fine town car, and I do prefer to drive it. The self-driving in itself, we could have a whole video about that. It actually is more nerve-wracking than anything else, because you're trusting the vehicle and you have to stay on it more. I got it for a month. It's like $200 a month to have the full self-driving. It does have the computer. The dude that bought the car before me, he got every single bell and whistle. He lost some money selling this thing. I don't know why anybody would do that, but it doesn't matter. It's my car now. The full self-driving, it goes through roundabouts and traffic lights and all this kind of stuff. I had to test it out, but trusting it, four-way stops in particular can be really hairy. It was just doing weird lane changes. It's really stressful trusting it and having to jerk the wheel, because it's that's not where we need to go, or there's a curb coming up. I don't trust that you're gonna not hit the curb. You can see if it sees it on the heads-up display, and so you're having to watch the road, watch the display, watch the road, watch the display, for maybe getting on the highway and just being able to kind of chill, and every now and then you give a little jiggle on the steering wheel. Yeah, great and all, but not something I'll be using. But just for around town driving, the ease of the electric, the lack of shifting, the good power band, the burst from your stoplight getting to your next stoplight to stop, it's very handy. And if you are easy on the driving, you can only use the gas pedal. You don't even have to use the brakes, because the regen is so strong, and when you get all the way to a rolling stop, it'll actually clamp the brakes for you so you don't roll anymore, because regen at 0 is practically not there. You have to burn energy usually to hold a motor in spot. So it's kind of nice that it has that. So around town, I really like it. It's not as fun as the WRX in a lot of ways, but the WRX is a 6-speed, and the constant shifting was sort of beating on my body after 9 months, I guess, that I had it, 10 months of driving it back and forth. My left side, my back muscles were starting to get developed more on the left side. My physical therapist started commenting after a few months, and within 2 weeks of not driving the WRX constantly, she was like, huh, why is your back not swollen on the left side anymore? I'm like, I think I know why now. But it's really fun to be able to go back to the gas car and drive it around and, you know, bang some gears and actually do some drifting and some donuts when there's some snow, because I can in that car, and in the Tesla you can't really do it. You can tell it that you want to, and it'll do like maybe 3/4 of a donut, and then it's like, no, you're going straight, no more of that, no more having fun. So maybe they'll release an update for that. I know some of the vehicles you do have like a track mode, and in track mode you can make it to where you can do donuts, but mine doesn't have a track mode, so yeah, whatever. It's a town car. I don't need to be doing donuts, right? Let's see, what else? That's really the main gripes that I would have. The charging, the range, in particular the cold weather issues that it has. It's not meant for cold weather, so it's not all roses, but I'm not gonna get rid of it either. I really do like the car. It's gonna be fun, and maybe in time, when the car is getting old and crusty, I'll be able to steal those electronics and make myself something custom, because it's just like a crawler. Honestly, it's, you got a motor, you got a battery, you got a speed controller, and then you have an interface, which is essentially our radio for it, and that's it. That's the entire car. You can yank these electronics out and you can put it in any frame that you want. You know, it's essentially like a rear axle that has the motor integrated into it, and the front axle on mine because it's 4-wheel drive. But yeah, if you got any questions about it, leave them down below. Do my best to get to them. But overall, I would say the Tesla, the Model Y, which I have, is a really good town car, but there are some considerations to it, and maybe it's not for everybody. And honestly, I wouldn't want to get rid of my gas car. That's why I didn't, and I'm very glad that I didn't, because when it gets really cold like this, yeah, it may not be the most reliable. I don't want to get stuck on the highway somewhere. I don't want to get stuck anywhere and have to rely on a battery to keep me warm, or the battery warm, or anything warm. It's not my style. So I'm keeping the gas car. I'm keeping both of them, and they both have their uses. But yeah, I do like the Tesla. So there you go. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.